Bloodshed wasn't supposed to happen on a hospital ship. When the Xenox Ascendancy locked their targeting lasers on the UN frigate Geneva, they expected cowering doctors and easy plunder. They didn't realize human medicine evolved on a death world, making our healers far deadlier than any alien warrior. Space is rarely kind to the unprepared, and to the Xenox Ascendancy, humanity was the epitome of the unprepared. Commander Varl stood on the command deck of the Xenox heavy cruiser, blood-tied, his reptilian eyes fixed on the holographic projection of the human vessel. It was a blocky, utilitarian thing, painted in a stark, blinding white, adorned with a massive red cross. According to intercepted communications, the humans called it the Geneva. It was a medical frigate deployed to the contested Aegis sector to provide disaster relief following a recent asteroid strike on a mining colony. To Varl, and indeed to the rest of the galactic community, the very concept of a hospital ship was an absurdity. In the Xenox Ascendancy, if a warrior was wounded beyond immediate combat effectiveness, they were left behind. Resources were for the strong. Survival of the fittest was not merely a biological reality. It was the foundational law of their interstellar empire. Scan results. Subcommander. Varl rasped his forked tongue, flicking to taste the recycled air of the bridge. Subcommander Kyle tapped heavily on his console. Target confirms no kinetic batteries, Commander. No plasma torpedo bays. Shielding is standard navigational deflection, useless against our plasma lances. Scans indicate massive cargo holds, filled with pharmaceuticals, synthetic organs, and high-density caloric pastes. I am reading biological signatures consistent with human civilians. No power armor. No heavy munitions. Varl allowed a guttural chuckle to rumble in his chest. Humans had only joined the galactic stage a century ago. They were soft, fleshy bipeds who wasted unfathomable amounts of currency and energy, keeping their weak and dying alive. They practically gift-wrap their resources for us, Varl sneered. Our biowarfare division will pay handsomely for their synthesized compounds. I want those Pfizer-BioNTech broad-spectrum antivirals intact, and secure the Siemens Healthineers quantum MRI cores. Their magnetic resonance technology is highly adaptable for our stealth drives. Shall I open fire, Commander? Kyle asked, his claws hovering over the firing matrix. No, Varl replied, his eyes narrowing. A destroyed cargo hold yields no profit. Open a hailing frequency. Let us hear them beg. Aboard the Geneva, the bridge was a hive of controlled, quiet activity. Captain Arthur Pendleton, a man whose graying hair and soft features gave him the demeanor of a weary grandfather, stood at the center of the room. He wore a crisp white uniform, devoid of the heavily decorated epaulettes favored by other species' military branches. Captain, the communications officer called out. We are being hailed by the Xenox vessel, audio and visual. Put them through, Pendleton said smoothly. The main view screen flickered, replacing the image of the encroaching cruiser with the imposing scaled visage of Commander Varl. The alien's teeth were filed to sharp points, a traditional display of aggression. Human vessel Geneva. Varl's voice boomed through the speakers, harshly translated by the ship's software. I am Commander Varl of the Xenox Ascendancy. You have entered contested territory. Your vessel is unarmed and outmatched. Power down your engines, drop your navigational shields, and prepare to be boarded. Resistance will be met with immediate vaporization. Pendleton took a deep breath, letting his shoulders slump. He arranged his facial features into a mask of deep distress. Commander Varl, please. This is a sanctioned Red Cross humanitarian vessel. We are carrying no weapons, only medical supplies and relief personnel. We have wounded civilians aboard. I implore you by interstellar law, do not attack a medical ship. Varl's laughter was a grating mechanical sound. Interstellar law is written by the victor's human. Your sentimentality sickens me. You harbor the weak, and so you shall die with them. You have 2 standard minutes to power down, or we will carve our way inside." The transmission abruptly cut, leaving the bridge of the Geneva in dead silence. Pendleton straightened his posture. The mask of the terrified diplomat vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating steel that would have sent a shiver down Val's spine had he been there to see it. "Did they scan us, Lieutenant?" Pendleton asked quietly. "Yes, sir," the tactical officer replied. "They scanned for standard munitions, kinetic plating, and plasma signatures. They missed the internal power grids entirely." Pendleton nodded. The aliens always scanned for weapons. They never scanned for industrial-grade surgical equipment. They never understood that a species forced to fight countless wars against its own biology, against viruses, and massive kinetic trauma on a high-gravity death world required medical technology that made military hardware look like children's toys. Status of the boarding parties. "They are launching boarding pods, Captain. Estimated impact in 90 seconds. They are aiming for Sector 4, the primary triage wards." Pendleton pressed the ship-wide intercom button. His voice, steady and devoid of panic, echoed through the pristine white corridors of the massive ship. "Attention all personnel. We have unauthorized biological entities incoming to Sector 4. They are heavily armed and hostile. Initiate the Hippocratic Protocol. I repeat, initiate the Hippocratic Protocol. Lock down the wards. Prepare for invasive surgery." Deep within the bowels of the Geneva, the lights shifted from a sterile white to a deep, pulsing amber. In the prep rooms, men and women in scrubs didn't scream or run. Instead, they walked with calm, practiced efficiency to the storage lockers. Chief Surgeon Rachel Dawes, a woman whose hands had pieced together thousands of shattered bodies from orbital drops gone wrong, pulled her hair back into a tight bun. She turned to the head orderly Thomas Riker, a former combat search and rescue specialist whose massive frame barely fit in his scrubs. "Tommy," Dr. Dawes said, snapping a pair of heavy-duty synthetic gloves onto her hands. "Looks like we have some uninvited patients." Riker grinned, revealing a set of perfectly white teeth. He walked over to a reinforced locker labeled Lockheed Martin Biomedical Exosuits. Heavy lifting. "I'll get the orderlies ready, Doc. Let's show these lizards how humans do triage." The hull of the Geneva shuddered violently as 4 Xenox boarding pods slammed into Sector 4. Magnetic clamps engaged and superheated plasma torches easily sliced through the frigate's outer hull. Subcommander Kyle stepped through the smoking breach, his heavy kinetic rifle raised. Behind him poured 3 dozen elite Xenox shock troops, their thick, chitinous armor gleaming in the dim light of the breached corridor. They moved with predatory grace, expecting the immediate shrieks of terrified human civilians. Instead, they found silence. The corridor was immaculate, lined with stainless steel handrails and reinforced glass doors. The air smelled sharply of antiseptic and ozone. A pulsing amber light washed over the walls. "Spread out!" Kyle ordered, his voice echoing unnaturally in the sterile environment. "Secure the pharmaceutical vaults. Kill any human that resists. Capture the medical personnel. They will serve as labor in the synthesis camps." A squad of 5 Xenox warriors moved down the left-branching hallway, heading toward the primary imaging wing. They kicked open the doors, sweeping the rooms with their rifles. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. Suddenly, the heavy blast doors at both ends of the hallway slammed shut with a deafening metallic clang. The magnetic locks engaged with a heavy thud. The Xenox squad leader spun around, snarling. "We are sealed in below the doors." Before the warriors could raise their thermal charges, the intercom crackled to life. A calm female voice echoed from the hidden speakers. "Welcome to the imaging wing. Please be advised for your safety. All metallic objects must be removed before entering the scanning environment. As you have failed to comply, we must forcibly ensure a sterile field." "What is this nonsense?" the squad leader hissed, behind a reinforced, lead-lined glass window. "Doctor." Rachel Dawes stood at a control console. Her fingers danced across a holographic interface bearing the logo of Siemens Healthineers. She bypassed the safety limiters on the ship's primary diagnostic array. "Activating the 50 Tesla quantum MRI field," Dawes murmured to herself. Inside the hallway, the air suddenly hummed with an invisible, terrifying vibration. The Xenox warriors clad in heavy, hyper-dense metallic combat armor froze. The squad leader let out a gargled cry as his kinetic rifle was ripped from his grip, flying through the air and smashing into the wall with enough force to shatter the plaster. A split second later, the magnetic field reached full intensity. The Xenox troops were yanked off their feet. Their armor, laced with ferrous alloys, was pulled toward the massive concealed superconducting magnets lining the walls of the imaging suite. They slammed into the walls with bone-crushing force, pinned immovably against the steel bulkheads. Their armor began to groan and warp under the sheer, unyielding pull of 50 Teslas of magnetic fury. "Triage complete in Sector 4. Alpha," Dr. Dawes noted clinically into her headset. "Patients are immobilized, sending orderlies to prep them for extraction." Further down the main thoroughfare, Sub-Commander Kale was growing uneasy. He had lost contact with the Alpha squad, and the silence of the ship was beginning to gnaw at his nerves. This wasn't how a conquest was supposed to feel. "Move forward," Kyle barked to his remaining men. "Breach the primary surgical theater." They approached a set of massive, double-wide doors. Kyle kicked them open, stepping into a cavernous room dominated by a dozen metallic operating tables. Above each table hung a terrifying array of articulated robotic arms, tipped with laser saws and microscopic manipulators. Standing in the center of the room was Thomas Riker. He wasn't wearing armor. He was wearing a dark blue medical scrub suit, but strapped over his torso, legs, and arms was a Lockheed Martin heavy-lift exoskeleton. The machinery whirred and hissed with hydraulic power, designed to allow a single medic to lift concrete rubble off a crushed victim. In Riker's hands was a heavy industrial-grade bone saw, its diamond-tipped teeth gleaming. "You're tracking dirt into my sterile OR." Riker said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Kyle laughed, though it sounded forced. "You are a fool, human. You stand against Xenox elites with a surgical tool." Kyle raised his rifle. "Die." Kyle pulled the trigger. A bolt of superheated plasma erupted from the barrel, but it never reached Riker. From the ceiling, a Johnson & Johnson automated surgical defense laser, typically used to vaporize microscopic tumors with pinpoint precision, snapped downward. Recalibrated by the ship's AI to track high-velocity projectiles, the laser fired a continuous, blinding beam of concentrated ultraviolet light. It intercepted the plasma bolt mid-air, dispersing the energy harmlessly. Before Kyle could comprehend what had just happened, Riker closed the distance. The exoskeleton allowed the massive human to move with terrifying locomotive speed. A Xenox warrior lunged at Riker with a monomolecular combat blade. Riker didn't dodge. He caught the alien's wrist with his exoskeleton-enhanced hand. The hydraulics whined, and with a sickening snap, the alien's wrist shattered. The warrior shrieked, dropping the blade. Riker drove his knee into the alien's chest plate, the immense hydraulic force caving in the hyperdense armor, as if it were cheap plastic. Sedation administered. Riker grunted, tossing the unconscious alien aside. The rest of the Xenox squad opened fire, but the automated surgical lasers above were already tracking them. Designed to cut through human bone and dense organic matter without damaging surrounding tissue, the medical lasers found a new target: the unarmored joints of the Xenox armor. Thin, invisible beams of focused light sliced through the room. Xenox warriors screamed as their thermal optics were blinded, their weapons cleanly bisected, and the structural integrity of their armor compromised by millimeter-perfect surgical incisions. Kyle watched in absolute horror as his elite boarding party was systematically dismantled by healers. The humans weren't fighting like soldiers. They were operating. They moved with a clinical detached precision that was far more terrifying than any battle cry. To the humans, the Xenox weren't enemy combatants. They were an invasive pathogen, and the Geneva was the immune system. Kyle backed away, his hands trembling as he keyed his comms. "Commander Val, pull us back. They are not a soft target. The healers, they are butchering us." Aboard the blood-tied commander, Val stared at the tactical display in stunned silence. The life signs of his elite boarding party were winking out one by one, replaced by human biological signatures that seemed completely unfazed. "Subcommander, report," Val demanded. "What kind of weapons are they using?" "They aren't weapons," Kyle screamed over the comms, the sound of a whining bone saw echoing in the background. "They're using the medical equipment, Commander. They know exactly where our organs are. They're dissecting us while we're still alive." A sudden sharp burst of static cut Kyle off. Val gripped the edges of his console, his claws digging into the metal. The galaxy had always mocked humanity for their obsession with biology, for their desperate need to heal and fix the broken. Val suddenly realized the fatal flaw in that logic. To heal a body, one must first perfectly understand how to take it apart. Panic was a contagion, and Commander Val could smell it rapidly infecting the bridge of the blood tide. The tactical readouts flickered with warnings, red bioluminescent glyphs pulsing urgently as the biological signatures of his boarding party vanished into the belly of the human vessel. They weren't dying, the telemetry showed their vitals stabilizing into deep rhythmic patterns, but they were entirely incapacitated. "Reroute power to the main plasma lancers!" Val roared, his heavy tail lashing against the command dais. "If they wish to play with their prey, we will glass their hospital from the void. Burn them out." The Xenox gunnery officer, a scarred veteran named Torv, frantically dragged his claws across the targeting consoles. "Commander, the weapons are offline. The primary plasma conduits are draining. Impossible!" Varl snarled, crossing the bridge in 3 massive strides to loom over the officer. "We have an antimatter core. They have a civilian reactor. How can our conduits be draining?" "It is the boarding umbilicals, sir," Torv stammered, pointing a trembling claw at the holographic projection. "When we breached their hull, we locked our magnetic clamps to ensure a pressurized seal. The humans, they haven't severed the connection. They've reversed it." Aboard the bridge of the Geneva captain, Arthur Pendleton adjusted the cuffs of his pristine white uniform. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the tactical display with the calm, calculating demeanor of an attending physician reviewing a critical chart. "Status on the parasite, Mr. Miller?" Pendleton asked, his voice even. Lieutenant Miller, a young communications and tactical officer, tapped his screen. "The Medtronic deep space dialysis array has successfully engaged, Captain. We've bypassed their outer shielding through the physical breach they so kindly provided. We are currently siphoning their superheated plasma directly from their engineering bay, running it through our cooling scrubbers, and venting the inert byproducts into space. They are experiencing a massive hemorrhage of their power grid," Pendleton observed quietly. Fascinating how the anatomy of a starship so closely mirrors the cardiovascular system. If you bleed out the plasma, the heart stops. Give them 2 minutes, then initiate the anesthetic protocol. On the blood tide, the situation was deteriorating into absolute chaos. The interior lighting began to brown out, replaced by the sickly yellow glow of emergency battery backups. The hum of the mighty Xenox engines, a sound that had struck terror into a dozen star systems, wheezed and choked like a dying beast. Varl slammed his fist onto the communications panel, opening a forced channel to the Geneva. "Pendleton!" Varl spat his reptilian face, distorted by rage and a creeping, icy dread. "This is a violation of the rules of engagement. You are a non-combatant vessel. Unclamp your ship immediately, or I will order a core overload and take you into the void with us." Pendleton's face appeared on the Xenox main screen. He looked entirely unbothered, gazing back at Varl with a look of mild pity. "Commander Varl, you must understand," Pendleton said, his tone infuriatingly gentle. "As a registered medical vessel, we are bound by a strict code of ethics. When a patient presents with extreme irrational aggression, poses a direct threat to themselves and others, and is bleeding out power at an unsustainable rate, we cannot simply let them leave against medical advice. You are under quarantine." "Quarantine!" Varl shrieked, spittle flying from his jagged teeth. "We are a warship." "You are an outbreak," Pendleton corrected coldly. "And we are the cure, administering sedation." Before Varl could bark another order, the blood tide violently shuddered. Through the breached boarding tubes, the Geneva didn't send soldiers or explosives. Instead, the massive industrial ventilators of the hospital ship, powered by the stolen plasma of the Xenox cruiser, roared to life. They pumped a highly pressurized, concentrated mixture of vaporized sevoflurane and synthesized Xenox-specific neuroinhibitors directly into the cruiser's life support system. The gas was a heavy, sweet-smelling fog that poured out of the ventilation shafts and rolled across the decks of the warship like an advancing tide. "Gas!" Torv yelled, pulling his emergency rebreather mask over his snout. "Seal the bridge seal." Torv's words dissolved into a heavy, slurred groan. The emergency blast doors tried to close, but without primary power, the heavy bulkheads ground to a halt halfway down. The sweet, sterile fog spilled onto the command deck. Varl reached for his own mask, but his limbs suddenly felt like they were encased in dense mud. The human sedatives formulated by Pfizer-BioNTech utilizing data gleaned from the captured boarding party's blood work mere minutes ago were terrifyingly efficient. The human immune system could fight off 1,000 alien viruses, but alien biologies were utterly defenseless against targeted human pharmacology. Varl's knees buckled. He collapsed onto the cold steel deck, his heavy eyelids drooping. The last thing the terrifying Xenox commander saw before the darkness claimed him was the glowing red cross of the Geneva, hovering in the void, a silent, unyielding guardian of life that had just effortlessly brought a predator to its knees. Silence reclaimed the contested Aegis sector. The blood tide, once a symbol of unbridled Xenox supremacy, drifted listlessly in the vacuum. It was entirely dark save for the bright surgical floodlights of the Geneva, which remained firmly clamped to its side like a remora on a shark. The main airlock of the Xenox bridge hissed open. Gravity had been restored by portable generators, but the air remained thick with the fading scent of chemical sedatives. Thomas Riker stepped onto the bridge. He had discarded the heavy-lift exoskeleton, now wearing standard white medical scrubs and a lightweight atmospheric mask. Over his shoulder, he carried a heavy trauma kit produced by Stryker Medical. Behind him came Dr. Rachel Dawes, a sleek silver datapad in hand, flanked by 4 orderlies pushing hovering stretchers. They moved with absolute terrifying calm through the nerve center of the enemy warship. The floor was littered with unconscious Xenox warriors. Riker knelt beside Torv, the gunnery officer. He checked the alien's pulse, peeling back a scaly eyelid to flash a penlight across the dilated pupil. "Vitals are stable, Doctor. Heart rate is a bit sluggish, but within acceptable parameters for deep sedation. "Noted, Thomas," Dr. Dawes said, stepping over a massive armored leg. She walked toward the command dais, where Commander Varl lay sprawled on his back. She stood over him, tapping her stylus against her datapad. "Severe osteopathic scarring on the right clavicle," she murmured, scanning Varl's body with a handheld ultrasound device. "Looks like an old fracture that was never set properly. Probably causes him chronic pain. That explains the elevated cortisol levels and aggressive posturing." Riker joined her, looking down at the warlord. "Should we reset it, Doc?" "Naturally," Dawes replied without hesitation. "He is in our care now. We don't do half measures, Tommy. Prep him for minor orthopedic surgery. We'll use the portable Boston Scientific bone welders. And someone get a line in his arm. He's severely dehydrated. These people do not drink nearly enough water." For the next 8 hours, the crew of the Geneva did not loot the warship. They did not sabotage its engines or plant explosive charges. They did something that would permanently alter the psychological landscape of the Xenox ascendancy. They treated them. Every single Xenox warrior aboard the Blood Tide was systematically examined, diagnosed, and treated. Fractured bones were perfectly set and fused. Old plasma burns were layered with advanced synthetic skin grafts. Parasitic infections completely ignored by Xenox military doctrine were aggressively purged with targeted intravenous therapies. When the humans were finished, they cleaned the bridge. They unjammed the blast doors, reset the environmental scrubbers, and neatly stacked the Xenox kinetic weapons in the corner of the room, having first engaged their safety mechanisms. Before departing, Captain Pendleton walked onto the bridge. He looked at the slumbering form of Commander Varl, now resting comfortably on a massive reinforced stretcher with an IV drip regulating his fluids. His previously mangled shoulder was now wrapped in a pristine white regenerative cast. Pendleton reached into his tunic and pulled out a crisp white envelope. He placed it delicately on Varl's chest, right over his slowly rising and falling heart. "Time of discharge, Mr. Miller," Pendleton asked. "Sedatives will wear off in approximately 4 hours," Captain Miller replied from the airlock. "The dialysis array has been disconnected, and we've transferred enough reserve power back into their auxiliary batteries to allow them to jump home." "Very good. Let us be on our way. The Aegis colony is still waiting for their relief supplies." Pendleton turned and walked back through the boarding umbilical. The magnetic clamps detached with a heavy clunk, and the Geneva silently slipped away into the void, its brilliant white hull gleaming against the starlight, leaving the paralyzed warship behind. 4 hours later, Commander Varl groaned. His eyelids fluttered open, his vision blurry. He expected to find himself in a human prison cell, or perhaps bound for execution. Instead, he was on his own bridge. He sat up slowly, waiting for the familiar, agonizing pain in his right shoulder, a pain he had lived with for 20 cycles. The pain was gone. In its place was a feeling of smooth structural integrity he hadn't felt since his youth. He looked down and saw the white cast. He looked around the bridge. His men were waking up groggy but entirely uninjured. In fact, Torv was staring at his own hands, marveling at the synthetic skin that had healed a severe chemical burn he'd suffered years ago. "Commander," Torv whispered, his voice trembling not with fear but with a profound existential confusion. "We are alive. They healed us." Varl looked down at his chest and noticed the white envelope. With trembling claws, he opened it. Inside was a single piece of thick, textured paper. It wasn't a declaration of war. It wasn't a gloating manifesto. It was a bill. Patient name, Commander Varl Xenox Ascendancy. Attending physician Dr. Rachel Dawes, UN Geneva. Procedures rendered forced sedation. Emergency, plasma, siphoning advanced orthopedic realignment, parasitic cleansing, general triage. Total cost of care, 4,250,000 galactic standard credits. Note: payment is due within 30 standard cycles to the United Nations Medical Corps. We strongly recommend seeking preventative care in the future to avoid such invasive emergency procedures. Drink more fluids. Signed, Captain Arthur Pendleton. Varl stared at the paper, his mind entirely unable to process the magnitude of his defeat. The humans hadn't just beaten him, they had treated him like an unruly child who had scraped his knee. They had demonstrated a mastery over his own biology that made his weapons feel like hollow sticks. They hadn't conquered his ship, they had sterilized it. From that day forward, the Xenox Ascendancy issued a new unshakable edict across all their fleets. You could engage human cruisers. You could test your mettle against human dreadnoughts. But if you saw a blocky white ship with a massive red cross painted on its hull, you powered down your weapons, averted your eyes, and prayed to whatever gods you believed in that the humans didn't decide you were looking a little sickly today. Did you love this story of humanity, using extreme medicine to teach alien warlords a lesson? Space is a dangerous place, but nobody messes with Earth's medics. If you want more epic sci-fi stories, thrilling HFY adventures and tales, where humans absolutely break the galactic mold, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with your fellow sci-fi fans, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another incredible journey into the stars. See you next time.